In the name of the one who was and is to come, the Almighty. Amen. There is so much going on in this gospel text, and I'm rather excited to unpack it because I think it will speak in new ways to us that will hopefully, by the time we are done with our worship this morning, that there will be a renewed ray of hope that you experience. That's what I hear, and I hope that you will hear that by the time that we're done. So you might have noticed that the Daniel text and the Mark text for today, the Old Testament and the Gospel text, seem rather apocalyptic. You might have noticed that. We got the Michael the Archangel showing up in Daniel, and the sorting out of righteous and unrighteous, and over here in Mark's text, gosh, whole structures are falling down. And what's going on in these texts? First of all, I want to just back up a little bit and step out of the text for a second and explain something. And that is that next Sunday is the last Sunday of the liturgical year. We will end the liturgical year with the feast of what's called Christ the King. It's kind of like this exclamation point on the end of the church year, where the last word we say is Jesus is Lord of all. And then we begin the cycle towards Bethlehem. The texts change. We move towards the prophecies of the Messiah and the texts of Jesus' nativity and all the story that is wrapped around those events. But there's a shift that happens. And towards the end of the liturgical year, every year, there are these apocalyptic texts that talk of the end things. So it's very interesting. That's why we have it. It's for no other reason. It's the end of the liturgical year. There is always that reminder in the text of what in that Hebrews lesson talks about the day. Did you see that in the lesson as you were reading along with the capital D? The day. I am not going to talk about the day, so you can relax. You can relax about that, but I am going to talk about this text from Mark. So we have this interesting experience. Remember last week Jesus was at the temple and he had the lesson about the difference between offering from your heart and all that you have versus offering for show or for selfish gain or abundance that gives you honor instead of God honor. And so it says, did you notice, Jesus has left the temple, and they're walking out of it. And one of the disciples is in awe of the structure. The temple that they're looking at isn't there anymore. I mean, part of it is. The western wall of the temple is still there. It's obviously one of the most sacred places within Judaism to go and to pray. The western wall, sometimes referred to as the Wailing Wall. You can go there today. But you have to imagine many, many more stones and a much bigger edifice. And so they're walking through, and someone says to Jesus, "Look at these stones." Just admiring it. But there's a subtext here. It's as if to say, look at these stones. This is so permanent. It's a big structure. I mean, these stones, like physically, the stones of the temple are these massive rocks. It's okay to admire the handiwork. It's the subtext that's the problem. Because those who are walking with Jesus some of them think, that he is about to usher in the rebellion against the Roman Empire and the reestablishment of Israel as a nation free of its oppression. Jesus is going to be a new king. He's going to be a Messiah that's going to bust heads and take names. And so it's a little bit of interesting to come out of the temple and say, oh, look at this. This is so great. Times are coming. The days are coming. Rome's going to get theirs. Now, isn't that an interesting way of hearing the text? Because then Jesus says something startling. You see all these stones? Not one stone will be left on another. You could just see his mouth fall. Huh? Well, first of all, it seems impossible. If you've ever been to a really, really big, glorious edifice, it's amazing how the things get built anyway. Never mind that it could someday fall down or be torn down or fall down. You would never think that, right? So that's in and of itself a weird thing for Jesus to say. But I think Jesus got the subtext. He said, I'm telling you, what you're looking at is not the substance of what I'm about. Not one stone will be left upon the other. Now that gnaws at me as a lot just to meditate on. And as I preach and prepare to preach, I often let the text gnaw on me. And it gnaws on me in a particular way this week because of the fires in California. It has brought for me, and I know for some of you who've shared with me, you have relatives and friends and so on that have been in that situation in California, that it's a very painful visual reminder that everything is transitory in this life. It can be gone tomorrow. And we're seeing it really magnified and up close in horrific ways. It's just, how can you not weep? And I think that there is something very visceral about what's happening now that kind of matches what's going on in this text. Where Jesus is assuring this disciple, what you think is forever is not going to be forever. In fact, we know in other gospel accounts, Jesus himself is talking about the temple of his own body. It's a prediction of his own death and his own crucifixion, which they are in no position to hear. They don't care about, they don't want to. In fact, when Peter hears about the crucifixion from Jesus himself, what does he say to Jesus? Do you know that text?
Oh, no, Lord, this cannot happen.
That's right, that's right. When Peter hears of it, in another text, he says, oh no, that'll never happen to you. We won't let it happen to you. We'll defend you. That is not what's going to happen. There's a subtext here, you see. This temple's forever. It's beautiful. It's a big edifice. We built it. It's not going anywhere. Jesus, you're going to be the king, and you're going to kick Rome out. And we're going to be back in power. And that's not what's going on here at all. And Jesus tries to help them understand that. Things aren't forever. At least not what you're seeing. Later on, I love this little part. The disciples are with Jesus in private. Peter, James, John, Andrew. Lord, when's this going to happen? When's this stone rending? When's this going to happen? When's this temple coming down? You know, they want to know. Now let's just stop for a second and think about that. That's a fascinating little conversation to have. Because I suspect they want to know so they can avoid it. I mean, they want to know so they can be out of town that day. Right? I think that's what they're asking. Like, Lord, what's going on here? Let us know. Give us the timeline. And in fact, sad to say, in all of Christian history, this particular response is very common. Think about the year 999. About this time, late in the year 999. You know what people were talking about?
Y1K?
Y1K. Yeah, not Y2K. Y1K, right? Well, the calendar's going to turn, and clearly this means that the end of the day, the big D day, when God shows up and there's a final judgment, that's going to happen. And people barricaded themselves in caves, and, you know, they do that to avoid it, right? We're going to hide out. We're going to go to the cave. We're going to get out of the way so that we avoid it. So all you unrighteous people will get judged, but we'll be safe. We'll be in our cave with our hunkered down with our food and our resources. Too bad for all of you, but we're safe. And people would sell their property. Does this sound familiar? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's happened a number of times throughout the history of the church in different parts of the world, this anxiety in these texts about avoiding calamity. Here's the thing, and this is the painful part for the disciples. It's, as always with Mark, he leaves us hanging and doesn't really tell us how they respond to this. But Jesus says, oh, listen, wars, rumors of wars, famine, it's all just the beginning. Now, there's no good news and comfort in that. You know, when I'm standing here reading that text, I'm sort of listening. Is anybody sort of giggling and laughing? Because I say, the word of the Lord. You know, there's nothing particularly good in those words if all you hear is what the disciples hear, which is, oh my goodness, have we made a mistake following this? And it's easy to do that because we have this tendency for survival. And we want to have knowledge other people don't have so that we survive the calamity. But here's the thing, Jesus didn't survive it. The Lord God incarnate, the Word made flesh, comes into the world the way the world was and the way the world is, a big fat mess. With us wacky human beings who have this tendency to treat each other poorly. We just do. Even if we don't want to, we do. That's where God shows up, in the mire and the muck. It's not something to escape, Jesus says. It's just the birth pangs. I want to suggest to you that the whole text swings on those last two little words, birth pangs. Now, for those of you who have not experienced this, the phrase here, birth pang, it just doesn't do it justice to that's really saying. I mean, pang, it sounds like a ping. It sounds like something you'd hear in your car or something. The birth pang. It's talking about something really quite violent. But what is happening there is the birth. It's the beginning of a birth. Jesus does not come into the world to redeem the world and make it all sanitized. Jesus comes into the mire and the muck of it to give new birth. To give new birth. And how do you do that? You go through the suffering. You go through the muck and the mire of being a human being and struggling with what it means that things are transitory. We talked about this at 8 o'clock service. Most of the folks in that service are quite a lot older, certainly older than me. And I said, you know, I've experienced this in my own life. I'm sure that everybody in here has experienced this as well. And that is, you have had somebody that you know and love next to you, and the next minute they're gone. An accident, something happens, and they are taken from you. And you realize how transitory life can be, how fragile we are as human beings. That's what these fires have all conjured up in me, of how fast things can change from living your life to being an absolute mess. And yet the purpose of the conversation Jesus has with the disciples is, it's the birth pains. There's something good about to be birthed in the midst of this suffering. Jesus is talking about resurrection. It is the story of Christ's life and death and resurrection, to come into the world the way the world is, to bring forth new life. It's the story of God's love for us that doesn't leave us abandoned, even though literally all hell breaks loose. That God is with us in the midst of it. It certainly doesn't feel like it for the people who are suffering right now, who are trying to live in a Walmart parking lot trying to figure out what to do next. It does not feel like this is a moment of birth and redemption. It feels like a pang. Like everything in life has been squeezed to the point of life being squeezed out, not life being given. But the story we have to tell is the one of Jesus, who says it seems that way, but that's not really what's going on. No stone will be left standing. There is a new world coming, a new life coming. There is a redemption coming. It is, in fact, here. He's presenting his own flesh to be the beginning of that new life for each of us. If there is any good news at all in this story, in these texts that seem really dark, it is the hope of new birth, of new life. For those of us who laugh at the term birth pain, who've experienced this as something more than just a pang, you know that once you're on the other side of it, there is a joy that is so profound that there are no words. It's a metaphor. I love that Jesus is using a birth metaphor to talk about the coming of the kingdom of God. That there is life with God in a fullness. Like the psalmist says, in your right hand are pleasures forevermore. There's this sense in which God is bringing forth in this world, in the very heart of our darkness and suffering and death and despair and grief and everything bad that we can think of to name, God is there in the midst of that, breathing new life. Now that's some good news. That makes me want to go out and give thanks this week and not just stuff with turkey, which is fun too. And I plan to do that, and I hope that you plan to do that as well, but not without knowing the substance of Jesus' ministry, which is that God is with us. God is with us. God is with us. You could take that message right out the door and remind somebody, because I'm telling you, people need to be reminded right now. I need to be reminded. And let's practice. Just turn to the person next to you and say it. Say it. God is with us. God is with us. See, that's not hard. It's not hard. You can do that. That's your assignment, actually. Make a habit of it. Because that's what the gospel is about. It's not us having as much, ingenuity and smarts and way to engineer things so that we all are happy. No. If you're waiting for that perfect day when everything works out great for you, and all the ducks are in a row, that day, I have yet to have that day. I'm thinking that's probably true for most of us. But it doesn't mean God doesn't love you any less. In fact, that's the world Jesus came to redeem. The messy one, the broken one, the sinful one. And that's what we have. And that's worth giving thanks for. That's why we give thanks, in my humble opinion. That's the whole reason to give thanks. It's because God's with us and loves us and is here to breathe new life into all of our death. That's awesome indeed.